Hello and welcome to Scouching's 2021 NHL Draft Ranking Special. We've made it through 21 scouting reports for the 2021 draft, countless live streams, and we're not quite done, but this will be the last produced video that will appear on this channel for a little while. And I felt that we kind of needed to grow up in this show a little bit from the birthday party kind of themes from the last two seasons, so I decided to class up the affair a little bit, lose the sweater, enjoy the warm July weather here in southern Ontario, and pull out a nice glass of fine wild turkey bourbon. It's got a lovely nose that feels like it's punching you right in your amygdala. Yep. And the taste certainly follows suit as well. Trust me, I'm enjoying this. So for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to be going through my top 4 tiers, which encompasses my top 31, which is the majority of the picks in the first round this season. The rest of my rankings can be found in an accompanying written piece that will be found at Scouching.ca, so click the link in the description if you want to read that. So to start this video, I do want to preface things by saying that I'm not the kind of person to look at a group of hockey players being drafted and just labeling them as unlikely to turn out as something special or just plain bad overall. But I will also say that in this year's draft specifically, I don't really see anybody as a potentially real elite game changer for an NHL franchise, but I do feel that the high-end group in this year's draft has strengths and weaknesses, and if those strengths grow in the next few years and those weaknesses get mitigated, you could end up with a draft class that really outperforms some people's expectations here. At the same time, those players have weaknesses, and if those weaknesses don't get patched, they might not become what you think they might be. There's a lot of those guys this year, but it could mean that this draft might be one we look back on where we kind of might have missed the mark by saying it's bad on draft day. But as always, all that does is indicate to me the importance of awareness of a player's strengths and weaknesses from a concrete standpoint, and what your developmental pathway with that player could be. So in case you're unaware, the way that I rank players isn't really super focused on the exact numerical order of the players. I group players into tiers, where I feel that they are in a legitimate group of players that could be all around the same level of role in the NHL if things go right, and the numerical order is just a matter of preference with how I might push for them on draft day, but I could totally understand the other names in that tier being presented as potential options. There is absolutely a lot of uncertainty in this work, and I do also think that the players that you surround your picks with can also make or break their career through no fault of their own, especially getting started in the National Hockey League. And just before we get into the tiers, I do also want to briefly encapsulate my overall philosophy as to what I'm looking for in NHL potential prospects. And I tend to value players who in their youth show signs of speed, pace, ability to combine speed and skill at a high pace of play to make plays or try to shoot shot attempts for themselves, selfless play with the puck, not holding on to it for too long and utilizing line mates effectively in intelligent ways. And when you're faced with pressure, how do you react? Are you physically resilient? Do you try to evade that pressure with skill? Do you try to evade it with speed? Do you try to just blow through physical pressure at junior levels? All of these things, I think, are the biggest keys to projecting NHL success with young players. And a lot of players might excel in some areas but not others, or almost all of them and maybe not one. Or some might not stand out in those categories right now, but you can see signs that they might. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty in this work, but those are the general tenets that I'm trying to look for in a young player. And picking one player over the other sometimes might just come down to a gut feeling with how they interview. And to me, that doesn't sound very analytical, but that can make the difference between a player that seems like a fit in your organization and a player that fans cannot imagine that you could possibly pass on in an NHL draft. And while I'm an analytics guy, I love to see great results, but I am much more interested in how those results are generated. And that is largely what I focus my work on, with the results just sort of being a bonus. So before we get into the actual tiers here, I also did want to go into some players that are ranked very highly on some boards that I track, that are not going to be featured in this video because I just don't have them ranked nearly as high. So we're going to start with Zach Bolduc of the Rimouski Oceanique in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and I've really tried with this guy, I really have. Over the course of this entire season, he seemed a bit fishy to me as a first-round potential prospect right from the get-go, and I really had trouble seeing anything that really showcased him as a first-round pick to me. He was a player that in my tracking data was extremely passive defensively, one of the worst suppressors of defensive transitions, far more often to be a receiver of passes in the neutral zone at high pace rather than a strong back checker who can chip in defensively. And I also caught him on far too many occasions just chasing physical play that was a little bit too far beyond just pushing the envelope. He was a player that would raise his elbows on a few instances of potential physical contact, hide out in a player's blind spot from time to time and look for physical contact that could potentially be unsafe. And when it did come time for him to play with the puck at 5-on-5, I just didn't see enough predictable skill or offensive creation on enough of a consistent basis that really puts him in the first round for me no matter which way I slice it. And the last thing I'll note is that I looked at some of the data and it really felt that some of his production really seemed to take off after a dynamic 200-foot high-energy player with some skill came to town in Rimouski in Xavier Cormier. Now, I wouldn't draft Xavier Cormier, but he is a player that I think I would invite to a camp and see what he could do on a pro setting. I felt that that was a player who was doing a lot of the legwork, and Zach Bolduc was kind of there participating in offense as well. There's some redeeming qualities to his game, but this is just a guy that missed the cut for me. The next is Brennan Othman, and this is a player that I've seen ranked pretty high in the first round, and I do understand kind of why from a he can be a hockey player perspective, but I really just haven't seen a whole lot that really moves the needle for me. Yes, he's got a great shot, and he does already seem to have a bit of an office right around the goal mouth at the side of the net where he likes to try to bang pucks in from there. And I do see nice straight line agility out of him, and he does move his feet relatively quickly and can be deceptive with it. His ability to generate speed with that quickness is not necessarily there right now, but he is a physical presence who puts in the work. But I've just never felt that he has quite the upside that I look for in a potential first round pick. Is he going to go in the first round? I think so. Is he going to be an NHL player? I could see him as sort of a bottom six guy, maybe a triggerman on a secondary power play here and there. But at the end of the day, there's just other players that he just kind of was bumped down by over the course of this season. And the last one I want to cover is Carson Lambos. Now, he just missed the cut for this video, and I do see some varying opinions on him that I do buy with regards to how I might be undervaluing him. I like his straight line speed. He's got great skill to step up in the offensive zone from the blue line and has a really nice wrist shot to take when he does step up. But I'm just skeptical of when pace gets ratcheted up around him that he's going to really round his game out as much as other defensemen in that similar range. His lateral gap control can be a question mark. His backward skating mobility and agility and raw speed is kind of a question mark as well. It just felt that if he couldn't pick play off by skating in a straight line, his defensive effectiveness was a little bit mitigated, and that was at the AJHL level. I think if you give him some time to develop in college, sure, there could be an interesting defenseman here, but again, I'm looking for a lot of upside that is objectively clear right from the time that I'm watching them, and I didn't see a heck of a lot of that out of Lambos, whether it was in the AJHL or at the under-18s this year. And I just get the gut feeling that he's going to be a defender that is gone way before I'd be ready to take him, and I'd be more than happy to snag a name like, say, Brent Johnson or Olen Zellweger later in the draft, who are guys that I also kind of believe in almost more than I do Carson Lambos. So with all of that out of the way, let's look at Tier 4. Now, I'm just gonna say it. This area of the draft for me is a complete mess, and I have no idea what to think. Getting a specific numeric order from top to bottom here that I'm comfortable with is physically impossible. I've tried for months, and I just can't quite get it. This is why I do things in tiers. But it's a group of players that I think could be perfectly useful players all around your lineup in a varying level of roles, who may be relatively raw but have very strong fundamentals, or perhaps players that I think are held back by really heavy inconsistency, but if you want to bet on what you see in a player when they're at their best, you may as well draft one of those guys. It's just a mishmash of a whole bunch of different question mark players with regards to how they project to the NHL, how much of an impact they'll have in the NHL, or if their development will even come along enough and gain enough consistency to be anything in the NHL in the first place. But if they do, you might have something interesting. And to me, the best example in this group of a player where you can kind of tell what they're going to be in the NHL, but you're not sure how much they're going to move the needle at the end of the day, is Oskar Olausen from HV71 in Sweden. There's skill, there's intensity, he can apply pressure away from the puck really well, especially once I saw him in the SHL, and he's got intelligence and patience when the puck is on his stick, and he has a really good sense of how to wait out defenders and look for new passing lanes. But since he left the junior levels, a lot of offensive areas of the game and just the amount of times he touched the puck completely cratered, and that even continued, and more so in the Allsvenskan when I tracked him. He wasn't getting the puck very often, and even when he did get the puck, I found that he wasn't really doing a whole lot with it. But I do like the hallmarks of his game that I did see in spurts here and there, and especially in the junior levels in Sweden. Is there a top 6 player here? I'm not so sure, but he's pretty solid on his feet, he's skilled, he's big, he applies physical pressure, and I think just through that, there might be an NHL player, maybe in a bottom 6 role one day. The next player is a player that encapsulates that idea of a player with strong, raw fundamentals, but really unclear lineup potential and questionable projectability, and to me that's Erton Martino. His pass vision, his vision to make a play in open ice, the quality of his shot, and the raw offensive output with him is a ton of fun to watch. He is one of the more exciting offensive-leaning players that I've tracked this year, and he is one of the craftiest and most patient and intelligent playmakers outside of the top group that I think I've come across this season. There will definitely, though, need to be some improvements to his agility and the pace of his game, especially as he gets older against more difficult competition, and that's going to be necessary to maximize what I believe he could be, and if he puts all those things together, look out. I think Erton Martino could be a great get for an NHL team, even if he slips past the first round. He would be a great low-risk second-round pick. If you miss, you miss. But I do really think that there is a really exciting offensive player here that could make pretty much any team more dangerous offensively. And if you want to talk about a player in that latter group where you just really wish a more consistent version of them would come out, but if you want to bet on them at their best, you may as well just pick them, the best example to me of that is William Strömgren. And William Strömgren, based on what he is at his best, could be a guy that's gone long before where I have him ranked. I really think that this guy could be high on certain teams' draft boards based on the skill and size package that he brings. He's done some things in the Allsvenskan against professional competition where I just haven't seen the same kind of finesse out of anyone in this draft playing professional hockey. He can disappear into the background for long stretches of a game, but when he does pull out his bag of tricks and gets a good head of steam going and attacks the opponent, he's a ton of fun to watch. He is an exciting, skilled winger with a nice combination of size and smarts and speed. I think there's an interesting player with Strömgren. Maybe he's not a guy that goes in the first round, but I think the right team could snag him early. The next name I want to go over is Francesco Pinelli, and I haven't said a whole lot about my thoughts on Francesco Pinelli because I don't know what to think with him. It's been really hard to get a good read on him this year. He went to play in the Slovenian Professional League, and whatever you do, don't watch that league. It's not great. It was really hard to watch him play there, and I didn't really feel like he was super comfortable in that league, and that might have just been the fact that it was one of the first few games he was playing over there, so we'll set that aside. The majority of games I saw, he was playing in the Alps Hockey League, and there I did feel he got better and better as time went on. I do see a lot of smarts with his puck possession especially. He can be physical away from the puck, and that did come out a little bit more. He applies pressure to opponents, and when he does get the puck back, if he has some open space to work with, he can be creative, use line mates selflessly, and make a play in the offensive zone with real no-nonsense playmaking. But the pace of his game is pretty low. He didn't shoot the lights out in a league like the Alps Hockey League, which is not the best professional league in Europe, and I just felt like he was one of those players where he wasn't really moving the needle a whole lot for as smart as he is. I think there's an interesting potential maybe bottom 6 guy here. He can play center, he can play the wing. There's nice versatility to his game, but on my list, there were some higher upside names that might be a little riskier that I did enjoy a lot more, and I think it just bumped Pinelli a little bit down my list to this range, but I would expect some team to pick him up based on his smarts and try to build his game around that. Next up we go to Carson Lambos, and I think Carson Lambos is kind of the black sheep of this year's draft. He was a very highly regarded prospect coming out of last season, and it did not take very long for people to watch him playing in Finland to go, maybe this isn't the top-ranked guy we all thought he was. I was part of that group, to be perfectly honest, and at a certain point in this year, I had him ranked pretty low on my list. But of any player where I've gone back and watched the tape that I have clipped of them, and I've sat back and gone, I might need to rethink this player a little bit, it was Carson Lambos. Yes, in Finland, he wasn't spectacular. He really should have taken over games more often than he did if he really is a top 10 NHL prospect. But I'm not going to rake a kid over the coals who traveled to Finland, playing with a group of players that he's never played with before, in a professional system that really struggled at the men's level, and really expecting him to be 100% of the player that he is. I liked his ability to close gaps out in the neutral zone and at least pressure defensive rushes really effectively skating backwards. He's got decent evasive skill to create new passing lanes. He took good care of the puck when he was moving it around the offensive zone. He created plenty of shot attempts as well. And while I did track a game of his in the Liga, and it did expose a lot of weaknesses in his game, especially when it comes to generating speed in a straight line and puck pursuit in defensive scenarios in the defensive end, he was playing against men in the Liga, and it's an interesting tightrope to walk. I don't know what's going to happen with him on draft day, but I did come away thinking that he was a player that certainly belonged in this range of the draft, and if he's available as a late first round pick and you think that there might be more to grow into based on what you saw last season, yeah, you could do a lot worse in the first round of this year's draft to me than Carson Lambos. Continuing down the alley of those William Strumgren type of players, Nikita Chibrikov is in this range, and there were moments this year where I looked at Nikita Chibrikov and tracked games of him and went, yeah, this guy's a top 20 pick, probably even top 15. But then I would watch more of him and sort of sit back and go, okay, you got to do something. I didn't see much out of Nikita Chibrikov where often enough across an entire game, he was really pushing the game in the right direction. If the puck was on his stick and he had some open ice to work with, certainly. He's a ton of fun to watch. But you do not get that luxury in the NHL very often. And I did not really see a whole lot of him being super effective away from the puck. But towards the end of the year, when he was in the KHL a little bit, I did see a bit of that coming out, and he was applying physical pressure well. I thought he was good at the under 18s, so he's a bit of a wild card with regards to what he's going to be, but I do think there's an interesting skilled player there that with patience and time with SKA's development program could turn into a really interesting skilled offensive player for an NHL team. Is he going to be available in the late first? I think it's possible, maybe not super likely, but all it takes is for him to be just the second guy on teams' lists a few times in a row, and he could slip 5 or 10 picks here or there. The last name I want to cover in Tier 4 is Chaz Lucius. Now, Chaz Lucius is another one of these really hard players to get a read on. He spent a lot of this season injured, he missed the under 18s, but I felt that every time I watched him with the NTDP this year, he got better and better. The question marks I have with his game is I would want to find out if his injury was factoring into the lack of pace that he showed in his game this season, and if he was taking things just a little bit easier to avoid re-injuring his knee, because in my data, he was one of the least active defensive players that I've tracked, especially for a forward. But on the plus side, he is a player who, when the puck is on his stick, is fantastic at finding little pockets of space under pressure, getting himself scoring chances, and just grinding the puck into the front of the net to try to make a play of some kind. To me, I feel like he's a bit more of a James Van Riemsdyk style scorer in the NHL rather than one of those Alex Ovechkin or Steven Stamkos guys who's just going to crank slap shots from the faceoff dot all day. But goals are goals, and if you're in the right place at the right time, a goal is a goal. And that was Chaz Lucius a lot of times this year. If you can find little pockets of space and deceive goalies based on having them not know when a shot is coming, that can lead to a goal as well. And if he's picked at 12th overall because teams have good intel that say, well, he was underperforming his potential all season because he was coming back from injury, I would totally believe it. If your team drafts him much higher than I have him ranked, it's not the end of the world. He's an interesting wild card to bet on, and I think there is decent upside here, especially if he continues to build on his mobility and that knee stays healthy. I may question how much of his scoring will translate, but he's scoring a lot, and I think that that also matters as well. So moving to Tier 3, I think these players have the potential to likely become useful complementary pieces for an NHL team with signs of potential for something more, with a lot of upside that might be worth betting on. And to start, my thoughts on Matthew Coronato are well articulated. It took me a long time to really appreciate what he brings to the game, but I am a fan of what he brings, and I think he will be an NHL player of some kind with the upside for something more, really that could be unlocked just by virtue of making him a better skater over time. I don't think coaches will mind playing Coronado with the smarts that he brings, the skill under pressure, the resilience that he brings as well when he is facing that pressure, and his knack for both scoring goals and setting them up in the offensive zone. I don't think he's going to score in the NHL as much as he has with the Chicago Steel, but I could see him being a very valuable forward for an NHL team, if not the flashiest one, that can play the wing but has potential as a center in the NHL down the road. Moving forward from Matthew Coronado, we go to Logan Stankoven. Rest assured, if I could, I would have made a scouting report on Logan Stankoven. I just didn't have enough data, but the data that I did track is just spectacular. It's wonderful. There's so much to like. His dangerous shot attempt percentage was 80%. The number of dangerous passes per 60 minutes he was sending to the front of the net was 21, which is amongst the best I've ever tracked. He had 15 individual dangerous shot attempts per 60, which is also just great. He maintained control on 78.7% of his offensive transitions and completed 3/4 of his passes. All those things put together, he was one of the most devastating offensive players I tracked. Yes, he's small, and the level of involvement in transition going both directions was underwhelming, especially in the defensive zone, but I do think the work rate and all-around offensive talent that he brings is going to take him really far. I've seen him ranked outside the first round, and if he's available in that range, you just shut up and take him. You just take him and thank me later. He's a great player with a ton of potential, and the only real limitation is his size, but he battles through that pretty well as he is. Next we go to Cole Sillinger. Now, I've bumped him up my list a little bit since putting out my scouting report because I've reflected a little bit on how his negatives were really impacted by him rather than Sioux Falls as a whole. I get the feeling that there's more to like about Cole Sillinger than not to like, and I think that his game in Medicine Hat is more the real Cole Sillinger we're going to get moving forward, and if that's the case, I think I was undervaluing him a little bit. His skill under pressure and the quality of his shot and the growing level of physical involvement away from the puck are really promising traits to work on. And I think at the very least he could be a devastating power play winger with strong 5-on-5 upside as a 200-foot guy that can shoot the lights out. Flipping the script a little bit, sometimes I go back to old scouting reports and really think if I've overvalued those guys a little bit just because they were the first ones where I had a full data set. And with Fyodor Svechkov, I've done that a few times this year, and nah, he's still really good. I really think that he's in a nice spot on my list here where I'd be more than happy to add him and let him develop with SKA St. Petersburg. Just by virtue of getting away from Lada Togliatti, I think he'll have more offensive weapons to deal with that can really help him boost up that production. He's dynamic and crafty and so smart both with and without the puck that I just really like what he brings to the table. He may be a bit of a slow burn, but if teams kind of forget about him a little bit and let him slip a pick here and there, and he ends up towards the back end of the 10s range or towards 20th overall, a team in that range could end up with a really interesting pickup to let develop over in Russia. Next, we're going to go to Tier 2. And in this tier, all of the defensemen except Luke Hughes are here, and we'll get to those in a second. But this group of players to me are players that I think will be useful core pieces that might not have the likelihood of being the best players to come out of this year's draft, but it is not impossible for them to do so. It's just, to me, less likely than the guys ahead of them. For starters, we're going to talk about Aatu Räty, and I am still a very big believer in what Aatu Räty is capable of. I think this is a player that has only been limited by being in a prison of his own mental expectations for himself. I really get the feeling that once the draft is in his hindsight, he'll turn into a better player once that pressure is alleviated from him. I think the right team could turn him into a fantastic two-way forward. He's got great offensive transition control, really good speed and skill combinations for a guy his size, and I think there's a lot to work with his game. I think you just need to get on his level, reset him mentally, and just get him in the right headspace to really maximize his potential, because I think there's a lot there, and I think he deserves someone to give him a chance. Especially if you've made a trade and landed a second first-round pick. I feel like if Räty's the guy that's slipping through this draft, you may as well take a flyer and see what happens and really believe in him, because I think he deserves that chance. Next, we're going to talk about Dylan Gunther, and I found his under 18 to be fine, I suppose, but I do think it exposed some of the questions that I had about him going into the under 18s with regards to his pace of play and his raw foot speed ability and ability to generate offense at high pace. When the game is played at his comfortable pace, he's brilliant. He's a great playmaker. He's a volume shooter from all around the offensive zone, which might be a bit of an issue for me, but I do think there's an interesting complementary top 6 player here down the road. Would I take him as high as 3rd or 4th overall like I've seen on some boards? No, I don't think so, but I do think it's possible that he is just the guy that slips in this year's draft a little bit to that 9, 10, 11th, or 12th overall range because other guys might just jump ahead of him at the last minute, and he could be a really tidy, nice pickup for a team that could just use another complementary offensive piece. And next we talk about Mason Mctavish. Now, I will grant right away that Mason Mctavish has been probably the most improved player to my eye based on last year through this season, but I still struggle to see Mason Mctavish as a legitimate top 5 pick in this year's draft, although I've kind of grown to accept that that's what's gonna happen. And I can see why. There is certainty with his profile. He's physical, he's got skill, he's a good perimeter playmaker as well at times, he's got a great shot, and he brings a work rate at both ends of the ice that you just respect. I feel like coaches are going to want to play Mason Mctavish a lot. I feel like though his role is going to be more of a really good third line guy or a fine second line forward that can play center or wing depending on the situation, with great power play scoring upside as well. I think there's an interesting player with Mctavish to say the least. He's a top 10 guy to me, but I just feel like there are players that have a bit more upside and risk that I like betting on that just bumps him down a little bit on my list. But if he goes at 5th or 6th overall, I can totally see why. It just might not be my guy. And speaking of players with that upside that I like, we're going to talk about Kent Johnson again. Now, my report on him was a little bit harsh, but it was harsh because I just believe in him. I think there's a great skilled offensive player that can hit highlight reels time and time again. It's just that it can get the best of him a little bit too often. It's objectively true that he kind of struggled to produce at 5-on-5, and he was a very good power play contributor, and his skill and brain for the game is very creative. He does things that no one else really does in this year's draft. He just needs to learn when to rein it in and find that sweet spot between flashy skill and creativity offensively and just being a functional part of a unit with that flash coming out when it's time for the puck to go in the net. More experience and a little bit of patience, bringing him along one step at a time and helping him adjust to various levels of professional hockey, I think are going to need to be a must for him, but I do have very high hopes for Kent Johnson, and I will be very interested to see where his career goes in the next few years. So we're going to talk about the defense here as a whole because they're all extremely interesting profiles in both strengths and weaknesses. And with Simon Edvinsson, I really like the raw, defined defensive game that Edvinsson brings, and I think that across multiple levels of Swedish pro hockey, he did not look out of place as a defenseman. But on the other hand, when the puck is on his stick, there's a lot of question marks with regards to his puck management, vision through the neutral zone, ability to choose when to rush a puck up the ice or pass the puck up the ice, just fundamentally hitting targets with his passes was an issue from time to time, but I do think that they did improve over the course of the season. We'll see where Edvinsson ends up in the NHL draft because I think he could go as high as 2nd overall or something, or he could be a guy that slips really far because teams are scared of his play with the puck. With Brandt Clarke, I think there's great vision and offensive zone creation unlike many defensemen in this year's draft, but I question the skating ability and his inability to maintain control on offensive transitions consistently. If it's the right team with a bit more of a dump and chase offensive style, I think he could be a better fit as he is right now, but I do think there's development in order to hit that ceiling that could make him one of the best players to come out of this draft. And with Owen Power, I think that his offensive rush potential and offensive creation are really, really high end. But there are concerns that I've outlined in my Scouching report that are pretty ubiquitous on the defensive side of the game that will really hold him back if they're not shored up, in my opinion. But for all of these defensemen, I have really high hopes, and I think they could turn into something very, very interesting with enough time and development. It just feels like they're just a step outside of the top group of my list this season. And on that note, we go to Tier 1. Now this tier has largely stayed the same for a number of months this season, and with this group I'm still pretty confident. I think they all run the gamut of real high-end potential players that could really boost your team's core and be guys that you can rely on in pretty much any scenario in an NHL game. And we're going to start with Luke Hughes, and the biggest advantage I think he has is that he is a full year younger than the vast majority of prospects in this top 12 range. He is very nearly a 2022 eligible defenseman, and to me just that gives him huge potential for growth. In my view, he's a great forward skater with great lateral agility with the puck on his stick. He can carve through opponents, carry pucks through the neutral zone and get into the offensive zone and make a play. And while I did have questions about his defensive abilities, and I did have questions with his ability to use line mates to their advantage, look off opponents and make easy pass attempts to line mates in open ice, and he could try to put a little bit too much on his own shoulders, I do think that for a player that plays like him, that's forgivable for now, and I think that over time he should learn how to overcome those obstacles. But I do think with Luke Hughes, everything will come down to his willingness to put in the work, both on and off the ice as an athlete and a person to really become the player that he can be. He's a bit of a complicated case study with regards to projecting an NHL player, and I do think there are possibilities where he doesn't really match up to his potential, but the reasons that those would happen are really just down to what's between his ears, in my opinion. But if he refines his game, uses line mates more often, plays a bit more of a selfless game while still retaining that great puck-crushing mentality, you could end up with a really, really tremendous defenseman in the NHL draft this season. And next we're going to talk about Fabian Laselle. Now, this is obviously going to be a guy that I'm a big fan of. What more can I say about him? I don't think I'd take him at number 1. I just feel like that's a player that I wouldn't want to touch that high, but I do think that he is part of this highest of high-end groups of players based on what he shows on the ice. If he can learn to push and pull the flow of the game a little bit better over time and just settle into the natural flow of a professional game, I think his potential will be unlocked even further than it has. He's extremely active, he covers the ice extremely well, and he plays with extraordinary pace already at this age at the SHL level. Continuing to put in the work to get stronger and more dynamic all around the ice will certainly help him in the future, and while there are rumors of off-ice issues that from what I've heard might not let him go in the first round at all, I do think that you can let teenagers grow up a little bit with regards to what I've heard specifically about him, and you really trust what you're seeing on the ice, because the on-ice product does not match up with what I'm hearing. He's a selfless, hard-working guy. It's a complicated one, but I am a believer in Fabian Laselle. And speaking of Fabian Laselle, we're going to talk about his teammate. Wait for it. The goalie, Jesper Wallstedt. Now, Wallstedt is doing something that no other goaltender has ever done as a draft eligible, which is play in the SHL a lion's share of games for his team. And he wasn't getting killed doing it. He had a .908 save percentage, which was lower than it was in the first half, but still quite good. I felt he was the better goaltender for Sweden's junior team at the World Juniors, and I love the technical ability he brings to the game. He just gives you a sense of comfort when you watch him that he just knows what he's doing. He's dialed in, he's square to the puck. There's a lot that I like, and I'm not really a huge goalie person. And the interesting thing with Wallstedt is that yes, goaltenders are risky, but not many goaltenders are Jesper Wallstedt, and in fact, no Swedish goaltenders have entered the draft with the resume that Wallstedt has. And at some point in the NHL draft, there will be an intersection between the value that Jesper Wallstedt could add if he works out, even factoring the risk, or you pass on Wallstedt and add someone else. What are they going to be? Maybe a second line guy, third line guy, second pair guy? Is that really worth passing on a potential number 1 goaltender for? You could make the argument, but I feel like the argument in favor of Wallstedt is stronger than a lot of goalies we've seen. He's literally in uncharted waters. I think he's a good bet. I think he's got the potential to be a great NHL goaltender with some refinements to some areas of his game, and I would definitely want to check with my smarter than me goalie people, but I just get really good gut feelings about this guy, and I know that's not very analytical, but I just can't shake it. And so we get to number 1 and number 2. Matthew Veneers is my number 1 guy, and that's no secret. But if I had to be convinced to pick anyone else, it would be William Eklund, and I would not really bat an eye thinking about it. I like Veneers' high-intensity game, how projectable it is across a 200-foot ice surface so long as he just gets a bit stronger, and I think there's a ton of playmaking potential, especially if he learns how to rein in his game a little bit, keep better control of pucks, and just settle in a little bit better while still maintaining that high pace of play. William Eklund's offensive creativity, his evasiveness, his ability to use the boards to his advantage and evade defensive pressure and make new ice for himself, it's all really great. He's great on his edges in open ice, he can cover ice extremely well, he's good with his pass reception, he drives offensive results very well, and he tries to chip in defensively where he can. He can shoot, he can pass, there's so much to like with William Eklund. Injuries and illness kind of put a damper on his season, but if you've done your medical checks and they all come back clear, and let's say he starts slipping a little bit in this year's draft, which it sounds like it might happen, and he's a guy that you pick up at 7th or 8th overall, you're laughing. I think that's a great pickup to make in that range because I am a huge fan of him and I'm not the only one. Veneers might be the more projectable and more reliable 200-foot option at number 1 overall, but I think the flash that Eklund brings and the offensive skill perfectly puts him right in that range as well. So to close out, we're going to hand out some awards, and we're going to continue the theme of classing up the joint this year and hand out some actual awards that, well, frankly, we found, but it is a step up from the Beanie Babies we handed out last year. So without further ado, my lovely assistant, also known as the table right next to me, will hand me the awards and we'll hand them out one by one. So for starters, excuse me, we're going to hand out this award, which goes to the biggest swing in the NHL draft. And to me, this is a player that I think has a chance of going undrafted, but probably should. And I fully admit that there is a strong chance he never plays in the NHL, but if he does, he'll be a lot of fun. Previously profiled names like Ville Koivunen or Jiri Tihacek, or names that I've really liked recently like Sean Chagall or Lucas Gustafsson all came to mind to receive this award, but I'm going to hand this one to the little Danish dynamo Marcus Almqvist. Almqvist was over a point per game for HV71's junior team before going to Denmark to play for his hometown Rødovre Mighty Bulls. I think that's how you pronounce it. It kind of just sounds like you just go Rødovre. But we'll go from there. The data I tracked on him was not spectacular, and in some areas it was lackluster, but it was very good in the Swedish junior level, and his Danish pro team was just not great and didn't really know how to use him, but he also didn't make himself that much of a target for pass receptions and moving pucks up the ice. He kind of flies around the ice and open ice, just kind of waiting for something to happen, so he's a very unrefined player, but he's also one of the youngest players in this year's draft. But he was also part of Denmark's under-18 team in the Division 1A tournament, where he scored 6 goals in 5 games in 2018-19 as a 15-year-old. And he was a mainstay on Denmark's under-20 team last year, where he scored a point per game internationally. So I've got high hopes for the little Rødovre rocket ship, but I do think that this is a player where a lot of worse players are going to get drafted before he does, if he does at all. But I am a believer because I like that little chance of him becoming what he could be if he just refines his game a little bit. Before I move on, by a little bit I mean a lot. He needs work, but he's a lot of fun, trust me. All right, thank you very much. I'll give you back to my assistant here. All right. The next award goes to what I call Mr. Analytics. Now, Mr. Analytics goes to the player that across the board, on average, performed the best in the metrics that I track. Now, in looking at my data set, it's pretty clear to me that technically that would go to Logan Stankoven, but my sample is pretty small, so it doesn't feel right. The next best option is Scott Morrow, who played the vast majority of his games against prep school hockey in the United States last year, which also doesn't feel quite right. But the best analytical profile across the board, and this is probably going to surprise you because it also surprised me and I'm the one who made the data, is Halifax Mooseheads player Zac Laru. I am absolutely skeptical that his game projects as well as his data projects him to be. But this is a player who on average across all the categories I track was around 20th or top 20, and the next highest average ranked player was around 25, except for Xavier Bourgault, who was around 21. Laru is pretty clear cut as the best all-around analytical case study from this year, and that is surprising, like I said. But he's top 5 in offensive transition involvement, creating shot attempts, completing passes, generating his own dangerous chances for himself, and in many other categories he was top 10. So with Laru, on paper, there's a lot to like. He's got evasive skill and offensive intelligence, but I do question the pace of his game, and he does like to push the envelope, get yappy on the ice, and really love to try to get under the skin of an opponent. And will that translate to the NHL? Maybe, probably, it could happen. I could see him going much higher than where I have him ranked, and he wasn't even profiled in this video. But nonetheless, the data is the data, and Zac Laru can come pick up his award if he wants. And so we get to the last award of the day. And this is an award for the most fun tracked player all season. Regardless of the results, I like to highlight players where I just loved watching them play, and I just value them greatly, especially relative to the ranking on average. In this award, I didn't really have to think about so much. This award's going to Logan Stankoven. I love watching him play hockey. There's so much to like. We went over the data points earlier in this video, so I won't rehash them, but he brings a work rate that I think overcomes the needs that a small frame like him will need in the NHL, with enough skill in tight quarters, a great shot, great playmaking vision, and a 200-foot approach to the game that I think is just extremely endearing to me. If he's a player that is available outside of the first round, it could be real larceny for the team that picks him up and develops him properly. I think there's a great player here with Logan Stankoven. He was a joy to watch, and I hope this trend continues into the future. I have really high hopes for him, so congratulations on this award. So with that, we come to the end of the Scouching Ranking Special, and we get to the end of the fully produced videos for this channel for this season. Thank you so much. Whether this is the only video you've watched, you tuned into one live stream, or you're one of the crazy people who watches everything I put out, thank you so much. It means the world to me. I love collecting and presenting the data for all of you, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. We've got lots of stuff planned between now and the NHL draft. There will be a patron-exclusive live stream to get in those last-minute questions. a Scouching live on Wednesday that I'm sure will be completely under control and manageable for me, and a gaming live stream or two sprinkled in, definitely on the day of the draft on Friday, to just kick back and have some fun and chat with you all. And be sure to tune in to the 2021 Scouching Draftathon, where we'll be streaming live during both days of the NHL draft, and any donations and super chats up to $1,000 total will be matched by me and sent to the Gord Downie and Chani Wenjack Fund. The Gord Downie and Chani Wenjack Fund is a great charity put together to help improve the lives of Indigenous Canadians by providing awareness and education for all Canadians. So be sure to check out their website in the link below for more information and give a donation outside of the Scouching Draftathon if you can. So that is it. Thank you so much. This isn't completely it for Scouching videos this year, but we're getting very close. I hope to see you in the live streams next week, and I hope to see you during the Scouching Draftathon, and I hope we can all have some fun and raise some money for a great cause along the way. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or join the YouTube membership program through the join button below. You'll get access to early access to videos, a Discord server, exclusive written reports, and plenty of other goodies. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the upcoming live streams.